Aqua Force is about to send another battalion into battle, one who might actually surpass the storm.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, it's time that we're gonna start with the set reviews for V-BT11 Storm of the Blue Cavalry, and with that namesake, we're gonna start off with the big clan of this set itself, which is of course Aqua Force. And Aqua Force got a lot of new interesting support in this set. Not only do we see the introduction or reintroduction of Tavis into standard with a very interesting new main gimmick, but we also see some generic support for Revan as well as just overall Aqua Force. But interesting enough, we see a new upgrade to the Maelstrom deck, which is pretty exciting. But without any further ado, let's jump straight into these new cards and see what this set has to offer for Aqua Force. And of course, we're going to start off with the reprints and the triggers themselves. And Aqua Force got two reprint triggers in the likes of a critical trigger and a front trigger, and both of them are just going to have 1 star for me. Then in that same breath, they also got a new heal trigger, which is active Drago Kit, but it's still going to be on 1 star as we already have access to a heal trigger. Now they also got a brand new draw trigger, which is loading Bullet Brave Shooter, and this is going to be a 3 star as it's a new draw trigger and we still have room for more draw triggers to expand their trigger lineup. Now they also got the brand new Sentinel critical trigger in the likes of Kelpie Rider Petros, and this is of course a 5 star card just like all the other critical Sentinels, as they open up a lot of deck space for triggers as well as Sentinel choices. Now while we're on the topic of reprints, Aqua Force got 3 special type of reprints, as they got 2 another secret rares as well as the reissue reprint. And the reissue reprint is for them the Great Researcher Blue Wave Soldier Senio Bergus. And Senio Bergus is a solid 5 star card. It's the Great Researcher. It's nice that we get a reprint of this, and they definitely could not print these cards more than enough, as they're just clan staples in general. Now as said, they also have the another secret rares, and those cards are the Maelstrom reprint VR units, and one of them is of course Blue Storm Dragon Maelstrom. This is the old VR, and it might not sound like a powerful card nowadays, but with the current support in this set, which we will cover soon, this particular card might actually become better than the Glory Maelstrom version that we got last year. So this, in my opinion, is a solid 5 star card reprint, as it's a much needed reprint. The card itself is super expensive, and yes, another secret rare will not help to lower the value in general, but at the very least, maybe some lucky players get a copy in their hand, so they might be able to build the new Maelstrom deck somewhat on a budget. Now the second another secret rare is of course the other Maelstrom, which is Blue Storm Supreme Dragon Glory Maelstrom, and this is once again a 5 star card. It's still a very powerful VR boss unit. It helps for the Maelstrom archetype and could definitely squeeze out a win here and there, and maybe even against Luard. Yes, Luard may have a gigantic hand size, but if they can still only guard with 1 card in hand, that might still put them in a scenario when they can't guard your attacks. And with the new Maelstrom support, this deck becomes all the better. Now when we're going back into the main set itself, we see a brand new starter for Aqua Force, which is Kelpie Rider Mitros. And this is going to be once again a 1 star because it's just a generic starter with no extra attributes to it. Now for the vanilla card they got this Crit 1 double crit variant, Terror Knight Macheon. And Macheon is going to be a 1 star for me because these type of vanillas, I'm not really a fan of them, and I don't really see them being used in Aqua Force in a particular way that might take advantage of this type of vanilla. Now that we discuss all the reprints and just the basic stuffs, let's talk about the generic support within this set. And the first card that we see is this grade 2 common card, Kelpie Rider Byron. And its ability is auto Vanguard the Rigor Circle. When it attacks, if it's the 4th battle of this turn or more, this unit gets power plus 15k until the end of battle. So this can become a 24k attacker if it's one of your last attacks or somewhere in your middle attack pattern if you're already in your late game. This in the early game doesn't really do anything for you because acquiring the 4th battle might be annoying, but if we utilize a card like Tidal Assault or maybe Algos, you could actually fulfill this condition on your grade 2 turn, and that might actually be really interesting because then becoming a 24k beater actually will help you to overcome those annoying defensive triggers that might happen in the early game when you try to rush them. So this could be applied in that scenario, but then once you go into your grade 3 turns, then this becomes all the better because then it's much easier to fulfill this condition, and with all the extra restanding we can do, you can actually acquire this extra 15k power, maybe even twice a turn, because it can can be your fourth attack, and then after that you can maybe restand it again with something else. So for all the scenarios, I think it's a solid 3-star card that can help you upgrade your certain strategy in whatever type of build you might play, and because it's generic, you can utilize it in whatever boss archetype you might want to utilize it for. Now another grade 2, which is probably going to be one of the strongest grade 2s in this set, is Terrific Coil Dragon. And its ability is Auto Rearguard Circle once a turn. When it stands by a card's ability, you may have this unit get power plus 5k until the end of turn. So it can become a 14k attacker once you restand it with something like an Elgos, or maybe one of your boss units that can able to stand it, like Naval Gazer Dragon for example, which allows it to hit for potentially magic numbers with a good booster behind it, or maybe on an Exo 1 marker. But it can also synergize with its own effect, because it has the ability Auto Rearguard Circle when it attacks. If it's the first battle of this turn, cost Soulless 1 and stand this unit. So it's similar to Tidal Assault, as both those cards you want to attack on the first battle, but in Tidal Assault you do that so it doesn't lose the power, and in this case you do it so it gains the 5k power from its own effect, making it a double 14k attacker, or double 19 or 24k attacker on the Exo 1 or 2, and whatever other power buff you might give it via other skills. So that gives you access to a really good restanding unit. And on that first battle, it's 100% better than Tidal Assault. It costs the same, but it's stronger. But it isn't necessarily a direct upgrade of Tidal Assault, because Tidal Assault at the very least can restand outside of that first attack, unlike something like Elgos. So with that in mind, I think it's still a solid 5-star card, because this grade 2 together with Elgos and Tidal Assault give a nice wide range of useful grade 2s that allows you to restand themselves in whatever type of scenario you want to play. They don't outright compete with each other, they all have their own useful role to fulfill in their particular potential deck. Now that we've seen these two grade 2s, let's go up the rank and see what the new grade 3s can do for Aqua Force in a general aspect. And one of those cards is Steel Whip of Turbulence George. And this card is quite controversial because of the errata it got, or let's say what it was before the errata, because its current skills are Auto and Rearguard Circle once per turn. When it attacks, stand one of your back row rearguards. This in the past didn't have the once per turn clause, and luckily it now does. So this gives you access to a standable back row unit. This might not sound all that great, but the way how you can utilize this is that you can potentially restand the booster behind a Tidal Assault, or Coil Dragon, or Elgos. So now that the second attack can then also be fully powered with that booster behind it, giving you stronger columns on themselves. Now, its second ability is Act on Vanguard Circle. Once a turn, cost counterless 1 and soulless 1, choose one of your opponent's vanguards, and it gets power minus 5k until the end of turn. Now this is basically a support card for Revan, because the problem is within the Revan archetype, if you don't sit on Revan, then probably most of your cards won't do anything, because they require that your opponent is not on the same power level they normally are. So this helps you to meet that condition more consistently. But then again, you probably still don't want to run this in Revan, because you'd much rather be on Revan in a Revan deck. So with that all in mind, I think I cannot give it more than 2 stars. Now another grade 3 that we've got is Spout Barrage Dragon. And its ability is Auto Vanguard and Rearguard Circle. When it attacks a Vanguard, if you have 4 or more other rest units, cost soulless 1, choose one of your opponent's rearguards and retire it. This card is somewhat similar to another grade 3 that we've got in the previous Aqua Force set that can retire something off our opponent's field, but to do that we need to rest 2 of our other rearguards to fulfill for its condition. This doesn't need to rest our own units, and it's just a Soul Blast 1 cost. Both these cards help you in a scenario where your opponent gets a defensive trigger, but you can still apply some pressure. You don't necessarily going to hit them anymore, but at the very least you can retire 1 unit. But this card has the upside over the other grade 3 that this card can still be useful once your opponent doesn't get the defensive trigger, because you don't need to rest your own units and you can still get that retire off. Overall, I still think it's only a 2-star card because it's not a powerful grade 3. It doesn't really help your overall engine. It's just a field snipe for a Soul Blast. But I think Aqua Force can do so much more for the same cost, or just with similar units that they have access to. Now the final generic grade 3 that we've got in this set is this grade 3 Marine General of the Raging Tides, Hristina. And Hristina has the ability Auto Vanguard and Rearguard Circle. Once a turn, at the end of the battle it attacked. While was boosted, you may stand one of your rearguards that boosted. If it stand, you may move that unit to an open back row circle. This is an interesting skill because this allows you to reuse the same booster for 2 columns. You can use this booster if it's your Vanguard circle, and then move it to one of the side columns to give them the boost application as well. If you have a grade 1 that has an on-boost effect, then you can suddenly reuse that effect multiple times a turn. But if you have Hristina on the front row of your main circles, then suddenly you could basically use one booster for all your columns, which not only allows you to potentially reuse that effect multiple times, but it also allows you to effectively have pseudo cards onto the field without wasting cards in your hand, so you can up your defensive capability while not losing on offensive options. So that's actually a pretty interesting effect. And it doesn't cost you anything. Yes, the effect is once per turn, but this unit will probably only attack once, so that doesn't really matter if you have multiple copies of her onto the field. So it's an interesting take on a potential archetype or a playstyle for Aqua Force, and we have to wait and see what the possibilities are and how many cards we can abuse this. So overall, I think it's a really interesting card, but it's not really powerful in what Aqua Force is going to do, because this is probably going to be the main boss unit of that deck, and that's probably going to be a budget alternative. So for that, I think it can only give it 2 stars, because this will probably not be played as a supporting grade 3 for whatever main playstyle we're going to get, like with Revan, Maelstrom, Thavas, or whatever. Now, speaking of main units and archetypes, let's go over the new archetype support cards for Maelstrom, as we've got a couple of cards that revolutionize the playstyle and really brings back what the old Maelstrom brought to the table. And the first card that we're going to look at is a grade 1 Maelstrom Searcher, which is Bubble Ball Corporal. And her ability is Auto Vanguard to Vanguard Circle. When its attack or the attack it boosted hits a Vanguard, look at the 7 cards from the top of your deck, reveal up to 1 card with Maelstrom in its card name from among them, and put them into your hand and shuffle your deck. So this card allows you to get to your Maelstrom on a more consistent pace, and that's really nice because you need both Maelstrom, as you want to ride the old Maelstrom and then go into Glory Maelstrom with the usual playstyle. That's really nice. But on top of that, we also have the grade 2 that can give our Maelstrom extra drive checks, but in order to pay that cost, we need to discard a Maelstrom. So a card like this helps us to get those cards into our hand. And as a general sense, this just helps you to filter your deck, and it doesn't cost you anything. So that's actually pretty nice. But the only problem is, it's an on-hit, meaning it will not always hit in most situations. So for that, I can only give it 2 stars. But this card is actually really good, because we have other cards that will enable this effect. But that's the power of those cards and not this particular grade 1. Now, a new grade 2 that we also got for the Maelstrom engine is Drifting Flow Fencer. And its ability is Auto Vanguard to Vanguard Circle. When placed, look at the 7 cards from the top of your deck, reveal up to 1 card with Maelstrom in its card name from among them, and put them into your hand and shuffle your deck. So this is the similar effect that we've got for the grade 1, only now it's unplaced, so you will 100% activate it. And because it's unplaced, means you have immediately access to those cards, which on itself will increase the drive checks that you will do that turn immediately, but it also allows you to potentially immediately pay for the cost of those grade 2s, where you need to discard those Maelstroms, so it gives you more consistent access to all those effects. But it also has a second ability, which is really impactful, which is Auto Vanguard Circle. When it attacks, if it's the 4th battle of this turn or more, and you have a Vanguard with Maelstrom in its card name, this unit gets power plus 15k until the end of that battle. So this becomes a 24k attacker on its own. This is important because with Glory Maelstrom, this becomes 34k. And every 34k unit allows Maelstrom to have a potential unguardable attack. All those plus 15k grade 2s, like Coral Assault and all the other likes, were really important for the deck. Now, we have an in-archetype grade 2 that is basically that, which also allows you to search for those Maelstrom cards, which is really, really good. So for that, I think it's a solid 4-star card, as it just helps to accelerate the Maelstrom playstyle that we have right now to a much higher level, and it can even synergize with the new playstyle that we're going to play with Maelstrom once we look at the next 2 cards. One of those cards being this grade 1 Radiant Assault, and Radiant Assault has the effect Auto Vanguard Circle. When placed, cost Soul Blast 1, and until the end of the turn, your when attack hits effects of that battle, this unit attacked or boosted, activate even if the attack did not hit. Then, cost put a card with Maelstrom in its card name from your drop zone on the bottom of your deck and draw a card. So this card allows us to forcefully activate those on-hit effects. So suddenly the grade 1 looks a lot better, because if we boost the grade 1 with this grade 1, or the grade 1 boosts this particular grade 1, then we can get that search off no matter what happens. But more importantly, our old Maelstrom had a on-hit effect on the 3rd or 4th attack, which allowed the Vanguard to restand for free. You discard 2, but you don't lose drive checks. That is incredibly powerful with this grade 1 because now we can 100% guarantee that that restand is gonna happen, which was the main weakness of that old Maelstrom. So suddenly our first grade 3 turn before we go into Glory Maelstrom becomes actually something with some pressure behind it. But that isn't where this stops, because we have Press String Dragon, which can give our Maelstrom extra drive checks. And as I said earlier, the Maelstrom VR, the old one, doesn't lose drive checks when it restands. So if we give it extra drive checks, that means the moment that it restands, it still will have those extra drive checks, which suddenly will turn Press String Dragon into actual pluses. And as an extra bonus to this grade 1 with that combo is that Press String Dragon needs to discard a Maelstrom card in order to give our Vanguard that extra drive check. Now, if we then utilize this Radiant Assault, we can then pay for its secondary cost to put that Maelstrom back into the deck and also draw a card. So suddenly we not only forcefully activate those on-hit effects, which can give us Maelstrom searches, as well as forcefully allowing our Vanguard to restand, we can restand it with those extra drive checks, which will give us inherent pluses. But on top of that, this grade 1 will then plus even more on top of that, which is pretty insane if you think about it. So for this, what this card allows you to do, I think it's a solid 4-star card. You might say 5-star card, but the reason why I'm going to keep it at a 4-star card is because this precisely only works with the Maelstrom engine. Yes, it can give all cards in Aqua Force the availability to always hit its effect, but it won't be as useful outside of the Maelstrom archetype thanks to the in-archetype support cards around it. But still, it's an incredibly powerful card for that engine. Now, a second layer on top of that is this grade 2 dual staff of Kingfisher Green Elpida. And Elpida has the ability Cadeus on Record and Guardian Circle. If you have a Vanguard with Maelstrom in its card name, this unit gets power plus 5k and shield plus 5. So she's a 14k attacker, 10k interceptor, which is always pretty good. It's generic good value. But on top of that, it also has the ability Auto Vanguard the Record Circle. When it attacks, a Vanguard costs counterblast 1, and until the end of the battle, your when attack hits effects activate even if the attack did not hit. Now this is once again a really solid card that helps the overall engine, but this is going to be a 3-star card for me instead of the 4-star because its power and shield value is a nice generic thing, but the when attack hits availability is less useful than a grade 1 because it's cost a counterblast, which will conflict with our other counterblasting cards within Maelstrom. So you much rather rely on the soul blasting cost than this counterblast cost, but nonetheless it increased the consistency of the overall deck, so it's still a really solid 3-star card for the overall engine. Now with the Maelstrom support cards analyzed, let's take a look at the brand new archetype or the new playstyle, which is of course for the one who surpasses the storm, Thavas. And Thavas has the following abilities: act on Vanguard the Rearguard Circle once a turn, cost rest a rearguard, choose up to one of your opponent's rearguards and retire it. So we rest one, we snipe one, so it's a 1-for-1 trade, but that unit will still stick on the board. So that's a nice, pretty cheap removal that we can have access to whenever we want, and it also being able to use it on the rearguard circle is actually pretty useful. But then we also have this second ability, which is the main attraction to this card, which is Auto and Vanguard Circle. At the beginning of your battle phase, if 3 or more of your rearguards are rest, cost, discard a card from your hand, search your deck for up to 1 grade 4 card, write it to stand, shuffle your deck, and that unit gets power plus 10k, drive plus 1 until the end of turn. At the end of the turn, retire that unit and write a grade 3 card from your soul as rest. We see the Gear Chronicle Pseudo Stride effect on Tavis. The only difference here is that, yes, it still costs a discard, but we can discard just 1 card no matter what its grade is. So it's easier to pay for its cost, unlike in Gear Chronicle where it needs to be grade 3 or higher. But on top of that easier cost, it has quite an annoying condition to meet in order to even use this ability, as we need to have 3 or more rearguards at rest at the beginning of the battle phase. So once we exit the main phase, we already need to have 3 units at rest. And of course, Tavis can fulfill some parts of this condition with its own effect, as it allows you to rest at least 1 unit. But we have support in Aqua Force, other cards from the previous set wave with Revan that can rest its own rearguards in the main phase, which will then support and synergize with this Tavis. But we also see some new support within this set that can help you to fulfill for this condition, while also acquiring a lot more value over time. But the issue here is that because you are resting your own units in the main phase before you go into the battle phase, that will put you in an awkward position that if you cannot stand them during the battle phase itself, then that means you are going to lose out on a lot of attackers in the process in order just to fulfill for its condition. So this card is dependent on that grade 4 that we're going to superior right to make up for those losses. And that's actually the case once we look at the new VR, which is the main grade 4 target for Thavas, which is the brand new Marine General of Heavenly Silk Lambros. And Lambros has the following abilities: Condeals in hand. If you have a Vanguard with Thavas in its card name, these cards get grade -1. So what this effect basically allows you to do is that if your Vanguard is Thavas, you can call this thing to the rearguard circle, or you can just ride it normally, but you probably will never want to ride this as your main Vanguard and just slam it down as a potential rearguard unit to rest it for some of your costs, or just to increase your overall attackers onto the board. Now, its second ability, which is probably its most important ability, is Auto on Vanguard Circle. When placed, choose any number of your rearguards and stand them. So, where Tavis forces you to arrest your units in the main phase in order to superior right into Lambros, Lambros immediately can restand all of those units to then still have an entire standing board once you are actually going to declare your attackers. Which is very important, because if this ability or this effect wasn't printed on the card, then the Tavis engine as a whole will probably be very underwhelming. But a very important thing about this effect, it allows you to fully take advantage of a lot of abilities that just need to rest your units for their cost, effectively allowing you to gain those abilities for free. So Tavis Rearguard Snipe is suddenly free. And we have other cards within this set and in the previous sets that just need to rest your own units for no cost to just gain an additional power or some effect. Lambros allows you to gain all that value for basically free, which is pretty important, as that allows you to get your value engine going turn after turn and after turn. But of course, Lambros isn't only just here to be a generic Vanguard attacker that allows you to get more value. It also has an inherent battle phase ability, which is Auto on Vanguard Circle. When attacked, cost counter +1 and soul +1. Choose a column, stand all of your rearguards in that column, and if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, those rearguards get power +5k until the end of turn. So not only will you probably have units that already acquire some power with all the resting main phase abilities that we do, we also have a Vanguard which is pretty decently sized, as Tavis gives Lambros an additional drive check and 10k power. So that means that Lambros is 25k triple drive, so that's already pretty powerful. But on top of that, Lambros can then stand an entire column and give that column another 10k in total, meaning it's most likely that you will still keep hitting over defensive triggers turn after turn, and you can keep the pressure up against your opponent. The only downside is that this cost for this ability is quite overcosted. The counter by Soul Blast is quite heavy for just one extra attack, even though that attack might be quite sizable. But when we take the entire package together, I think Lambros is a solid 4-star card. It allows you to gain a lot of value over time. It can give you access to free snipes, extra free power onto the board, maybe some draw engines, just you name it. There's a lot of value in Lambros in combination with your other cards within Aqua Force. But its ability to potentially reset the column is kind of underwhelming, but in the overall grand scheme of things, I think it's solid enough to give the card a lot of value and can be a good centerpiece for your main engine. Now, we've seen Tavis, and we've seen what Thavas can go into, but before we can get a good glimpse of what Thavas actually provides to the whole archetype, we're going to look at the rest of the support cards before we go back to Thavas himself. And one of those supporting cards within this archetype is Kelpie Rider Nikki. This grid 1 has the ability Auto Vanguard Circle. When placed, look at the 7 cards from the top of your deck, reveal to one who surpasses the storm Thavas or Kelpie Rider Dennis. From among them, put them into your hand and shuffle your deck. Now, this skill we have seen it time and time again. It just increases the consistency of our overall engine, as it allows us to fetch 2 specific cards from that deck into our hand early on. Now, its unique ability is Act on Rearguard Circle, cost rest this unit and put a normal unit from your drop zone on the bottom of your deck and soul charge 1. This is very important. This is once again a card that rests itself for free, but the value that we gain is that we can put a card onto the bottom of our deck, which can be our Lambros, as we're relying on a grade 4 that we need to superior right, so it has the same problems as a Gear Chronicle deck, that once we're out of Lambros, the deck doesn't really do anything. Nikki is our grade 1 that can keep shoving that card back into the deck turn after turn. But on top of that, we can soul charge. And that soul charge is really important because a lot of powerful cards within Aqua Force and within the Tavis engine uses soul to acquire some kind of value. Think of our restanders like Tidal Assault or Coil Dragon. Those cards use a soul to restand. But there are many other cards that can utilize soul to some extent to gain us value over time. So this card is an integral piece to that engine, and with the extra consistency bonus on top of that, I think it's a solid 4-star card for Tavis and can be a really good card for Aqua Force if we keep going this pattern of playstyle. Now, we already mentioned his name with Nikki's ability, so let's take a look at the grade 2 Kelpie Rider Dennis. This grade 2 has the ability act on Vanguard and Rearguard Circle, cost, rest another rearguard, look at the top card from your deck, and call to the rearguard circle. This ability may only be used by a card with the same card name once a turn. So this card can give us free pluses, but the only problem is that that free plus is random. We don't know what we're going to get at the top of our deck. It can be an excellent beater or a grade 2 engine piece, or it can be a trigger. So overall, I think it's a solid 3-star card. It's just 3 pluses, but it can screw us over a little bit if we keep calling triggers to the field because we don't get them to hand. So there's a layer of RNG right there, which prohibits himself going into the 4-star range for me personally. Now, another grade 2 which can be really nice for the Tavis engine is Marine General of Desperate Fight, Aegis. And his ability is act on rearguard circle once a turn, cost, counter +1, and rest 2 rearguards. And this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. So this card can acquire a lot of power. It does cost you a counterblast, but the important part is that this card can help you to rest 2 rearguards within 1 ability. And as we've seen with Thavas, we want ways to get 3 units rested as consistently as possible. And if we only have units that can rest 1 card per card effect, then that means we need 3 specific cards enabled to fulfill this condition. A card like this can increase the overall consistency as we only need 1 card plus our Vanguard Thavas. So overall, I think it's a solid 3-star card. It can gain a lot of power and it helps us to meet the condition for Thavas. So it can be a nice consistency card if you want to rely on an ability like this. Now, the final card for the Thavas engine that we've got in this set is Kelpie Rider for Dorius. And for Dorius has the effect on a rearguard circle. When rest by another card's ability, cost, counter +1, choose one of your rearguards and that unit gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. So this card is a really nice target for your multiple rest abilities because if you have a lot of counterblast to work with, you can give your units a lot of power as this ability is not restricted to once a turn. So if you can combine it with the specific cards and you have enough resources, it can help you to swarm the board with really powerful units, and with the ability to even restand some of those units themselves like Tidal Assault or Coil Dragon, and even with Lambros being able to restand these units, you can get a lot of value over the course of a couple of attacks. So I think this is a solid 3-star card that can work in certain engines, but isn't necessarily a staple card in every Tavis deck because you might want to go for a different approach instead of this particular grade 1. Now, with everything discussed, we can go back to Tavis himself and actually see the value and the potential behind this card. Now, what's interesting about this particular grade for you with the Pseudo Stride effect is that unlike Gear Chronicle, this card is actually equal to the value of the old Stride effects. Because you can give whatever grade 4 you write the extra 10k and the extra drive. That extra drive will negate the discard minus you will have to even go in that grade 4. Gear Chronicle's grade 4s or those superior ride effect doesn't necessarily always give you that extra drive check, meaning you will not inherently negate that minus. So that's a very important thing about Tavis that Gear Chronicle doesn't have access to. But a more important thing with Tavis in this case is that he states 1 grade 4 instead of specifically Lambros. So if Aqua Force ever gets another grade 4, Tavis will work with that card. Now the question is, will they get that grade 4 ever besides Lambros? We don't know. It's all pure speculation, but it's a thing to keep in mind because Tavis is open worded, so it can have some future potential. But with the support cards that we've seen, with all the cards that can rest themselves, it's actually quite easy to fulfill this condition, especially with the older support. And with the fact that Lambros that we now have access to can immediately restand those cards, we can get a lot of value for free. And you might say, yes, that is inherently value of Lambros because it's Lambros ability, but Tavis plays a part in that because Tavis can specifically get access to that Lambros whenever we want. So that's a value point for Thavas as well. So with everything combined and what the cards can provide for the clan, I think Thavas is a very solid 4-star card. It can give the clan access to a lot of free value. It can get them access to very powerful attackers and multi-attacks on top of that. But the only issue that I see with this deck in general is that it's very piece reliant. If it doesn't have access to Lambros, the deck doesn't really do anything. If it doesn't have access to enough cards that can rest its own units so it can fulfill for its condition, the deck won't do anything. If it doesn't have enough cards that can benefit from those rest effects, then the deck, once again, will probably not do anything, or at least not much. And of course, Thavas' main on-attack skill is kind of underwhelming in comparison to what we've seen for other decks, but its main attraction is to be able to utilize those skills in the main phase and then get basically free value once you go into the battle phase is definitely not something you should laugh at, because it's a lot of value that could suddenly come out of nowhere. So that's why I think it's a solid 4-star card, and I think the engine overall is a very solid 4-star engine with maybe 5-star depending if the cards play out the correct way. And with that, we've seen the new support cards for Aqua Force in total. There's a lot of interesting things this set brings to the table for the clan as a whole. Of course, we have the brand new Tavis playstyle, which utilizes the Gear Chronicle Superiorite Stride mechanic with Lambros, and then utilize those interesting resting your own units in the battle phase and immediately stand them to gain a lot of value over time. But on top of that, we also see some very peculiar generic support cards that take the engine or the playstyle of Aqua Force for multi-attacking and switching units from column to column or from circle to circle and giving a unit twist to that. But I think the more interesting or the more surprising support cards that we've got in this set were the support cards for the Maelstrom archetype. That deck went from 0 to hero very fast, and that basically happened only by the inclusion of one particular card, and that was the Grade 1. Yes, the Grade 2 is the same thing, but the Grade 1, for the total package it can provide to the engine and what was already present, it changed the game for Maelstrom completely, and it's actual viable strategy come alongside with Thavas that we have right now. And interesting enough, the new support that we've got for Thavas could potentially also work in Revan, as Revan and Thavas have a very similar playstyle with resting your own units for some beneficial effects. And with that, we conclude this set review for Aqua Force for V-BT11, Storm of the Blue Cavalry. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these new cards for the clan. Are you excited for these new cards for Aqua Force, or were you kind of disappointed for what Thavas actually brings to the table and you were hoping for a different take on the clan itself? Let me know all your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below, and I will see you in the next set review once we delve into the next clan for V-BT11. This video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!